Hi, I'm Talia Baroncelli, and you're watching theAnalysis-news. This is part 2 of my discussion with journalist Jonathan M. Katz. In part 1, we were speaking about the legacies of U.S. colonialism. If you enjoyed part 1, you could go to our website, theAnalysis.news, and if you're in a position to donate, feel free to hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or on other podcast streaming services such as Apple or Spotify. And also make sure you're on our mailing list. That way you're always up to date every time we publish new content. So see you in a bit with Jonathan M. Katz. I'm very excited to be joined by Jonathan M. Katz. He's a journalist and author of the book, The Big Truck That Went By: How the World Came to Save Haiti and Left Behind a Disaster. His second book, which we'll be discussing today, is called Gangsters of Capitalism, Smedley Butler, the Marines, and the Making and Breaking of America's Empire. So thanks so much for joining us again, Jonathan. It's great to have you back.
It's wonderful to be here.
I have two more kind of broad stroke questions. My first question would be, what was the role of class at that time? I mean, reading your book, it seems like it was actually much more important and present in terms of how it was used in politics. So, for example, the assassin of President McKinley, he was a steelworker and he was unemployed in 1893 because of the Depression, and then he ended up killing McKinley, also partly in response to maybe some of the images coming out of the Philippines and all of the atrocities in 1901. But the class element is really present there, and then also in the 1930s, the early 1930s, obviously the Great Depression, and then in 1932 you have the bonus march on Washington. So the bonus expeditionary forces, they were veterans, about 43,000 of them marched onto Washington. They wanted to get their bonuses paid out for having fought in World War I, and Senate was discussing this, but then I think they just ended the session and didn't actually want to pay the veterans. So then there was a huge encampment and protests, and General MacArthur was involved in ordering one of them to be shot, I believe. So that also led to FDR becoming president and implementing the New Deal and essentially trying to avert. Well, I think what he was trying to do was to avert people becoming communists. So he wanted to ensure that people actually had access to jobs and to full employment and to better conditions so that they wouldn't turn to communism. So why don't we just speak about the role that class played at the time in politics? And then my final question will be about the coup that Smedley Butler foiled.
Yeah. So, really briefly, class is extremely important in understanding everything that's happening here. And Butler's class and his kind of mutability, his ability to sort of move between classes in some ways, at least in terms of reputation, I think has a lot to do with his politics and also what he ends up doing and what his reputation ends up being. So like I said, he's a rich guy, right? And his father's a congressman, very powerful congressman throughout Butler's life. Plays a very important role on the Naval Affairs Committee, for instance. His mother's family is very rich in banking and the railroads, but he doesn't go to college. He's kind of in the Marine Corps. The time that he's in it, it's very much sort of like it's kind of a working class activity. It still is in a lot of ways. And as he's in there are sort of efforts internally within the Marine Corps to kind of professionalize, especially the officer corps. And by professionalizing, that almost invariably means bringing in people who are better educated, better spoken, have time in their lives to sit around reading theory. And there kind of become these internal struggles between kind of the working class Marines and these what Butler ends up calling the swivel chair admirals. The people who didn't fight their way up to the ground. They came in from the academy and things like this. And Butler very much takes the side of what he calls the roughnecks, the guys who and these guys tend to be poorer. They tend to be less educated. They went into the Marines, for a paycheck or because it was the only access that they possibly, that one of the only avenues of access that they had to either escape the towns that they grew up in, or to get any kind of like prestige, or like, a sense of accomplishment of like having been part of like a big national project in their lives. And, throughout this period, like he really, he's on the side of kind of like the working class Marine. And this ends up, I think, translating to an appreciation of the struggles of the working class in the United States in general. Butler also, ends up, but when I talked about counterinsurgency, and I talked about the ways in which he's able to sort of see the people that he's dominating as people, but he really does horrific things, just absolutely horrific things. But he also, is able to see some of the people who he's dominating, who he's serving among, as people as well. And so he develops, some sympathy at a minimum for, impoverished Haitians, impoverished Hondurans, Nicaraguans, Filipinos, things like this. And all of those things in a lot of ways kind of come together for him at the end. Another big radicalizing moment is World War I. There's obviously a lot to say about it, but he is based in the rear in World War I. He oversees initially a disembarkation and then an embarkation camp, same camp. And he spends a lot of his time really trying to care for the needs of like the rank and file soldiers who are especially coming back to his camp, having gone through the horrors of the trenches and the gas in that war. And so all those things in a lot of ways come together, as you note in the bonus march. Very briefly, what happens is it's the depths of the Great Depression, and servicemen had been promised as a way to sort of sell the draft, because there hadn't been a wartime draft since the Civil War. So Woodrow Wilson, the way that he gets men and their families to allow them to submit to the draft, is he promises that they can get sort of back pay for the time that they're away from the factory or the fields while they're at war. But this is an enormous bill, and Congress keeps putting off any kind of payment for it. And finally, an agreement was made in the 1920s under Calvin Coolidge to pay out the bonus, as it's derisively known, right? Because it's opponents of this compensation, of this back pay, call it a bonus, because they're like, it's like you had the privilege of going to war and like, getting blinded by gas for your country, and now you want a bonus. But this kind of becomes like the common name for it. And the agreement that's arrived before the Great Depression is that this will be paid off in 1945, or on the death of the soldier, the veteran, whichever comes first. 1945 at this point, by the way, nobody knows that it's going to be this extremely significant year in history.
Yeah, it just happens to be that they said it at 1945.
Yeah, they're just like 1945. That's far enough in the future. It's like 1925 or whatever. It's like it's far enough in the future that like, well, we can deal with it in 20 years. And during the Great Depression, poor working class people, and a lot of people have been thrown into the working class. A lot of people have been thrown out of the working class into the non-working class. This is like actually 25% unemployment. It's like a significant portion of the population of the United States at the time. For veterans, like the only thing that they have in their lives that has any value, monetary value attached to it, is this bonus certificate that they were issued in the 1920s. And so tens of thousands converge on Washington, D.C. and set up a tent camp. It's kind of for those who we're getting a little old now, but like for those who remember like Occupy, Wall Street, it was kind of like Occupy DC, 1932. They hitchhike, they take trains, and they converge on the Capitol. They bring their families, and they're there demanding that Congress, the Senate specifically, pass a bill paying out the bonus immediately. And this is very threatening to the establishment, is very threatening to the administration of Herbert Hoover. who is an old frenemy of Smedley Butler's. He got Butler shot in battle in China in 1900. You have to read the book to get all the details about this. Butler ends up getting court-martialed or has already been court-martialed by Hoover for Butler's insults against Benito Mussolini. But
yeah, because he said that there's a case of Mussolini saying that like a child was run over by a car, and what is one life compared to the great life of the state or something like that. Like it's nothing in comparison.
Yeah, he spoke out of turn. He told the truth in an opportune moment, and so in this moment in this bonus camp, it's an enormous deal at the time. There are all these, it's basically kind of an organic movement of just like poor out of work veterans, but there are different philosophies and different fringe elements that are trying to take advantage of this. There really is like the CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States. Earl Browder really does like send representatives to try to convert it, to see like, can we do like a kind of communist infiltration of this thing? It doesn't really work. There's no evidence that happened. There's also like a lot of sympathy, especially among some of the organizers of this, toward fascism. One of the organizers in particular. And there's a lot of fear. So as you noted, this ends up being, so Butler comes to speak on behalf of the bonus marchers. It's actually after the Senate has gone to vacation without acting on the bonus bill. They snuck out through the tunnels under the Capitol because they didn't want to confront the bonus marchers. And Butler goes and gives a like sort of rousing speech, just like, don't leave, like stay here. He understands organizing, and he also understands the power of location and holding high ground, both physical and moral. And he's like, don't leave, like stay here. Because as soon as you're gone, like you lose your power. 9 days after this, Hoover orders Douglas MacArthur, who's the chief of staff of the army, to basically invade and destroy the encampment, which he does with the assistance of his assistants, Major Dwight Eisenhower and Major George Patton, and among others. And this is it's this very heightened moment. MacArthur sees that what he is doing is he claims outright that he has stopped a communist revolution in its tracks. Effectively what's happening at this moment, and this will I think lead us to our final destination. What's happening in this moment in the early 1930s is that there's a broad agreement across American society, across much of the West, that liberal democracy has failed. Right? Because it's like the two signal accomplishments of liberal democracy at this moment and in this period are World War I, and the Great Depression. And the idea is clearly like this isn't working. And some people are looking to the Soviet Union as an example to follow, and other people are looking to fascist Europe, especially Germany and Italy, as the example to follow. And a lot of the people who are looking to fascist Europe tend to be plutocrats. They tend to be the wealthier, industrialists, the more business connected,
and the bankers,
and the bankers.
JP Morgan.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, okay, because for a while in, I'm not doing it justice here, but like, socialism has arrived, and it has won a revolution. The communists have won a revolution in Russia in 1917. And, people start looking at this and other sort of class leveling theories, including anarchism, Proudhonism. I mean, there are other things that are in the conversation of the time, but there are a lot of people in the US in particular who are looking and they're like, look, this is the obvious, this is the alternative. This is the alternative that speaks to us. Then fascism comes around basically as a direct response to socialism. And like Mussolini is an ex-socialist. And effectively, like what Mussolini's innovation is, if you can call it that, is it's a way of reorganizing society in this sense that it's not a monarchy, although Italy still has a king. It's not a liberal democracy at all, obviously, but it's also not communist. And Mussolini incorporates all of these ideas that are sort of ways to kind of defang, outmaneuver socialism, by, for instance, creating, what he calls corporatism, which is the term is often misunderstood, but what Mussolini means by it is essentially creating kind of national workers' guilds that involve both capital and labor, right? So instead of having a national labor unions kind of, but like instead of having like a labor union, you have a corporation, corporazione, which has kind of like the heads of the steel mills and the workers of all the steel mills together in like one like steel corporation, right? That's just one example. There's others. The other thing that his black shirts do, his street toughs, is they just like go bash in the heads of like labor organizers and communists. And obviously, he it imprisons people like Gramsci, right, who like writes his prison notebooks like because of this, right? So it's basically like from the perspective of people who want to keep their money and their class and their power in the United States, they look to Mussolini in particular as being like this great modernizer who has sort of found the solution to both liberal democracy and communism. And obviously, the Bonus March does not end up becoming either a communist or a fascist revolution. What happens is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who's another friend of Smedley Butler's, they've hung out together in Haiti because Roosevelt helps oversee the occupation of Haiti as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Roosevelt is another, in some ways similar to Butler, obviously a little different in kind and tenor, but he's like a class trader in some ways, right? He's a very rich guy, very, very powerful family, very wealthy. The Roosevelts are both politically and economically powerful in New York. He especially he's the governor of New York at this time as he's preparing to run for president. And he looks at what happens in Washington in 1932 and he's horrified. And he sees both the brutality of MacArthur. He sees sort of like the imposition of fascist Mussolini-like tactics against American citizens. He also sees the threat. He kind of shares Hoover's fear of a threat of a communist revolution in the United States. And he's like, we need to do something about this. And his run around all of those ends up being effectively the New Deal. So his theory is, and I think it works, is let's show people that a liberal democracy can meet their needs, right? We will use the power of the state. We will use the wealth of the state, and we will use the collective wealth of the American people that we control through tax revenues to show that we can work in the interests of the working class. We can put people back to work. We can put the plutocrats in check. We can raise taxes on the rich. We can get money off the gold standard, which was something that the American working class had been demanding for decades at this point, well into the late 19th century. There's a whole suite of things that rural electrification, ultimately Social Security, like all of these different things. And what he's doing there with the New Deal, this is the purpose really of the New Deal. Eric Rauschway is a historian. He's written about this at length. The real purpose of the New Deal is to show Americans that you can participate in a government organized under the U.S. Constitution in which you vote for leaders who will accomplish your ends, who will help you, and will help you, like in a lot of ways, on a class basis against the wealthy. But wealthy Americans are scandalized by this because they don't understand what Roosevelt is doing. They don't understand that Roosevelt is trying to short circuit effectively communism or any kind of push towards socialism in the United States with social democracy. As they see it, he's just a socialist. He's effectively just a Bolshevik, and he's going to just like, turn the United States into the Soviet Union, which is ridiculous. It's not what Roosevelt was trying to do. As communists at the time would have very gladly told you, but they don't see it that way, and so they say, okay, well, let's if just sort of reading Mussolini doesn't work, we need to do what Mussolini did, and we need to stage effectively a march on Rome, in Washington, and they recruit a middleman named Gerald C. Maguire, Jerry Maguire, goes to recruit Butler in 1933 and 1934, using the bonus and his experience in the bonus march as sort of a wedge to basically, try to denounce Roosevelt at the American Legion, which is a very reactionary force at the time. And the American Legion, by the way, was like inviting Mussolini to their conferences at the time. Right? So this is not theoretical. And in 1934, Maguire starts sending Butler a series of postcards from Europe. He visits fascist Italy. He visits Berlin, where Hitler has recently come to power, and is very, very fond of both of them, but he doesn't think those models are going to work in the United States. The model that he decides to adopt is a model that is being tried out in France, a country that in a lot of ways politically has a lot more in common with the U.S., much more longer history of being a liberal democracy. It hasn't been a monarchy recently as Germany and Italy both have been. And in February 1934, on February 6, 1934, there is a far-right fascist riot, which involves one small group of revolutionary communists, because they always have to be there, to basically storm the French legislature and prevent a transfer of power to a center-left government. And this is driven by anti-Semitism. It's driven by conspiracy theories, and it is just sort of generally driven by the fear in the French right, as it is in the U.S., that this center-left government, which is like the most milquetoast center-left government, right? But like that they're just going to be a stalking horse for communism. The communism is now going to come to France, and they storm the French legislature. They get into a huge fight with the police. There's a lot of parallels between January 6th and February 6th, beyond even the day of the month. And the riot is a clown show. They don't even reach the Palais Bourbon, which is where the French legislature sits, but they are able to intimidate the center-left government into not taking power. And so instead, a center-right government comes to power. And this is a very important event in France. It really, in a lot of ways, sets the stage for Vichy and the collaborationist regime. A lot of the French right, and this goes all the way up to today with the RN, the Rassemblement National. It goes all the way up to today. These genealogies in a lot of ways, but this is it's a very coalescing moment for the French right. Maguire looks at this, and he appears to be, acting on behalf of this consortium of American businessmen that was known as the American Liberty League, which involves the DuPonts, the heads of some, minor but important oil companies in the U.S., the McCann Erickson ad agency, General Foods, like a whole bunch of these different people. And through his boss, who is the treasurer of this group. And his boss is sort of like a shadow Smedley Butler, who's traveled the world as kind of as an American spy in American military intelligence, and operating, intelligence networks overseas, and sets up an intelligence network in Europe, things like this. Grayson Murphy's his name. He's also a financier in New York. But anyway, so Maguire basically comes to Butler and is like, we're gonna do what they did in France. I want you to model this effort. You're going to use the American Legion, and we're going to model it on one group in particular, the Croix de Feu, the Fiery Cross. And we're going to march into Washington, and we are going to intimidate. We're basically going to surround the White House, show FDR that he doesn't have control over the country or Washington anymore, that his life is in danger, really. And either he will resign entirely or delegate power to, and these are the years before the 22nd Amendment, so that the order of succession is not fully established as it is in the U.S. now. And so they're basically, their plan is that they're going to demand that Roosevelt name a assistant president, as they call it, or a secretary of general affairs, but basically a guy who they will name to be this like sort of super cabinet position, and to either delegate all of his presidential authority to this guy or resign in favor of this guy. And this guy who they're imagining will then become effectively the first fascist dictator unelected of the United States. Again, this is they're modeling this off of the March on Rome, when Mussolini, his black shirts converge on Rome, and basically convince Victor Emmanuel, the king of Italy, to depose the Italian government, put Mussolini in as this like assisting king, essentially, and then kind of, back off and not really have any political power anymore, and sort of. And they're like, well, maybe, like McGuire even says to Butler, as Butler testifies in front of Congress, maybe we'll do with FDR what they did with the king of Italy. Butler doesn't go along with this, thank God, and he instead blows the whistle and goes to Congress and testifies about everything that he knows. And Congress conducts a very brief and muted investigation that goes nowhere, and no one is held responsible. Effectively, the only person who is like definitively, connected to the coup, in terms of first of all, this is kind of laughed at in the press, but the commission in Congress, and it's headed by John W. McCormack, who ends up becoming Speaker of the House. He actually is the longest serving Speaker of the House of Representatives. Ultimately, they say, like, Butler seems to have been telling the truth, and like, our very limited amount of research like indicates that like something like this probably was discussed, but they don't bring any of the DuPonts or the heads of Phillips Oil, Sun Oil. They don't bring any of these guys in to testify, and then McGuire ends up actually dying a couple months later at the age of 37. No evidence of foul play. It is interesting timing, though. And his McGuire's brother blames Smedley Butler. He like blames him for all of the stress that he caused on Jerry McGuire. And that's basically it. And so for American history since then, this is sort of treated as like this weird footnote, this weird afterthought. A lot of people to this day who've heard of this thing sort of doubt that it existed. Some people claim that Butler, did this to as like a self-publicity move, or
that he was a grifter, that he was just trying to get more attention by making this up.
That's not. I don't think that's accurate at all. I see a lot of reason to believe that it happened. I also have not found a smoking gun, but nonetheless, Butler did. He did not do himself any professional or personal favors by going up against these big guys like he did. He actually, in a lot of ways, like becomes sort of more marginalized in society, which then puts him in the position that he's in through the rest of the 1930s, which is just sort of as like a professional activist and gadfly, giving speeches like "War is a Racket," and then he dies in 1940, having unsuccessfully tried to keep World War II from happening. I'll get to that in 1 second as sort of the last little coda here. But I don't think he did himself any favors by doing this. My guess is that FDR, this coup, basically exposing this coup plot was sort of enough to keep it from happening. And that FDR needs, the oligarchs to go along with some of his New Deal reforms. He doesn't really need their entire buy-in, but he also needs them in some cases to like stand down against him because, they still have, senators in their pocket who could really cause troubles for his legislation. Things like this. And my guess is that it's basically sort of like an agreement between him and the DuPonts. I don't know about this, but like, I'm just sort of theorizing here. And it's not a theory that's unique to me. That it's just sort of like, look, I'm not going to try you for treason, but you have to let me do some of these new deal reforms. The last thing that I'll just say about, sort of the end of Butler's anti-war career is that the irony is that, he's really trying to keep America from he's trying to keep America out of World War II, but in a lot of ways he's trying to keep World War II from happening in the first place. And he doesn't really find himself on the side of, the America Firsters. He certainly doesn't find himself on the side of like the pro-Nazi, Charles Lindbergh types. He's much more concerned about a war in the Pacific because that is where his experience has been. He doesn't like fascists. He denounces fascists as we talked about. Like he got court-martialed for insulting Benito Mussolini. He's not pro-fascist at all. But his feeling is his dream is that he can keep World War I from repeating itself. And to keep, another generation of American men, because they're all men at the time, from going through the horrors and the psychological trauma, the PTSD, the moral injury that he experienced. But the irony is that he has done more, probably than almost any other single individual, to make World War II an inevitability. So he dies of cancer in 1940. The day after, I think, the French surrender to the Germans in Compiègne in the Battle of France. So in a lot of ways, that project ends up being a failure because obviously World War II does happen regardless, and the United States does get involved. But he remains a symbol and an important rallying point for somebody who learned from his own experience, who learned from his traumas, who learned from the traumas that he put other people through, to try to speak out. Maybe it was too late for him. Maybe it's too late for us as well. But we can sort of look back to him as a model of a deeply, deeply flawed and deeply, deeply imperfect person who nonetheless, and despite himself, and belatedly, ended up speaking out.
Yeah, well, I hope people read your book because there are a lot of parallels between those times and how he was trying to fight the elite, the bankers, the defense contractors, especially toward the end of his life. And, now, I mean, we heard Kamala Harris saying that she wants to make sure that America has the most lethal military. Trump goes on about strength. I mean, both parties are essentially propping up war and ensuring that contractors just profit from it. So there are a lot of, similarities and parallels there.
100%. Yeah. I mean, his book, which kind of becomes a slogan, war is a racket. What he's identifying is what ends up being called the military industrial complex. And what he is identifying is that all of these interests, banks, especially in his view, in his time, munitions makers, like arms dealers, people who make the weapons of war, that it is in their interest to make sure that war is happening all the time so they can make good on their investments. I don't think he was even able to really pull back the camera enough, although he did to some extent. He did. I mean, well, he did actually. He did, because he talks about in a very famous essay that he writes for a magazine, which is sometimes confused with War as a Racket. But he writes about all the things that he'd done on behalf of all these businesses in all these places. He says, I made Haiti safe for the National City Bank boys. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the sugar interests. I made China.
I mean, the canal in Panama, for example. I mean, that was directly benefiting J.P. Morgan and the Delta brother.
Exactly. China for Standard Oil, Nicaragua for Brown Brothers. He talks about all these things, and then he says, I was a racketeer for capitalism, which is where the title of my book comes from. He says, looking back on it, I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he did was operate in 3 city districts. We Marines operated on 3 continents. So he sees the way that these things fit together belatedly, but he calls them out, and it is as true today as it was then. And it doesn't mean that, the answer is sort of the obverse of American imperialism, like that it's sort of this negative American exceptionalism, right? This is sometimes referred to, that everything bad that happens in the world happens because of the United States, and that anything good that happens in the world will happen in the defeat of the United States, right? That Russia defeating the United States in a war or China defeating the United States will somehow make the world better. Butler didn't believe that either, right? Because if Butler thought things like that, then he would have then been like, so let's team up with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. He was able to see around that as well. But it does mean that there are vested interests. And when you look at something like Ukraine, it's very important to understand sort of all sides of this, that Russia invaded Ukraine. They didn't have to do that. They weren't forced to do that. They may have been responding to sort of geopolitical pressures as they saw them, but there's no excuse. 2 wrongs definitely don't make a right, and 2 war crimes don't make peace. And, but at the same time, it has been very much in the interests of the American military industrial complex in particular, Lockheed, Boeing, these major corporations, to flood Ukraine with weapons and make sure that it's bolstering their bottom line, and to keep that fighting going for as long as possible. And Butler didn't have any easy answers, and I don't think there are easy answers. But I think it's also just very important to understand how these things fit together, and the ways that the past and past experiences can inform our understanding of the present.
Jonathan M. Katz, it was great speaking to you about this book. I really hope people read Gangsters of Capitalism, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching theAnalysis.news and for supporting the channel. See you next time.